Well, Noreen, we will give you the floor, and you can address 1, 2, or 3 of the respondents on any issues, and then we might see if they want to respond to you. Did you enjoy the fact that you met another member of the Reinhold Niebuhr
family? Yes, very much. And he had one of my favorite quotations in there too, which I think actually appears in my book somewhere. So thank you for that. I'm going to address a couple of comments to each of the respondents, and I'm going to take them in reverse order since Braden is now fresh in our mind, and work my way back to Brian. So, yeah, you ended with the question of sensuality, Braden. And that brought to my mind the fact that I think you're absolutely right that this is a quest to continue to have the good life, so to speak. One of the things you might immediately think of, I mean, one of the things I mentioned with the Star Trek episode is that, okay, well, if we port our brains to computers, it seems to me a big part of the good life is sex. So what about sex? You know, would that go away? This has, this question has not occurred to people like Kurzweil. And both Kurzweil and Frank Tipler, who's another one who thinks in somewhat similar vein, have addressed the question basically by saying, well, you know, sex is nothing but, again, an experience inside your brain. So we could have the same experience, all we have to do is tittle at the right, you know, neuronal connections, and you can still have wonderful, you know, you'll think you're having an orgasm because you'll be having the brain part of it. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Woody Allen's Orgasmatron. Those of you who remember Sleeper. But one of the problems with this view is precisely that it makes sex essentially masturbation. You know, it makes it non-relational. You know, Woody Allen went into the Orgasmatron alone, not with others. And it would be the same thing where Kurzweil says, well, all you have to do is titillate the right neurons, and sure, you know, you'll have an orgasm, that's great, that's all you need, you won't miss sex. I think they're missing the most important part of sex, which is that this is an experience that is shared most of the time with someone else, and that leads to deep connection with another person. I also worry, you know, one of the things that I have noticed is that all of the people who are writing about these various forms of computerized transhumanism are rich white men.
Yes.
You know, and you can't fail to note that, and that there is a certain type of life, and it's very much a life of a person who lives in mind that they wish to fulfill. So it's a type of sensuality, and I'm afraid that it is a type that denigrates, or that could lead to denigration of both women and of the natural world, that neither one would seem to be needed any longer. That, of course, brings me to some of the things you said about sin. And one of the things I noticed when you pointed out Niebuhr's understanding that one of the roots of sin is anxiety about one's finitude, that we often, you know, quote the Apostle Paul in saying, from sin came death. But within the Eastern Orthodox tradition, there's a very strong tradition that reverses that and says, from death came sin. You know, that it is precisely our anxiety about death that leads us to these various forms of pride in an attempt to overcome that death. That leads me to one of the questions that came up for me with Brian, which I'll just insert there, which is a question that was raised to me by a friend of mine who worked for quite some time as a chaplain at Stanford and then at San Francisco Hospital. And he said, you know, I really can't understand it. Why is it that it is often those who consider themselves to be most strongly Christian who are the ones who will say, no, you must do absolutely everything for a relative who is in the process of dying? He said, I really can't understand. Is death that bad? You know, from a Christian viewpoint, we would think that Christians would welcome death, particularly in a situation of a person who is experiencing a great deal of suffering. So that was a question that came up when you were talking about pit transplants. You know, all of these things seem to deny that Christians should, you know, not seek death, but also not fear it, but go towards it with a certain amount of equanimity. Going back, let's see, to Braden, one other comment that I had under your idea of the pride of knowledge. You pointed out how Niebuhr notes that we do not know everything, but then we tend to reduce problems so that we can grasp them, and in that reduction often lose the very nature and complexity of the problem. And I connect that with something Mary said, that she pointed out that the way that Kurzweil is thinking about the brain, you know, which is a very computational way. You know, it's a way that only thinks about certain parts of the brain. You raise the question, are we making the mind too small? Are we missing part of the mind? And I think that's an excellent question, and that we are. I believe that Kurzweil and some of others like him fall into the trap of the fact that they have been computer scientists all their life, and then they begin, as they turn their focus from being on the computer to being on the human being, to continue to think in the same terms that they have been thinking of before. Therefore, they think of the human being in computational terms. And I do think that this misses large portions of the mind and of who we are. However, I would also say to Mary, take heart. You know, one of the things that I know as a computer scientist is that there's a lot of truth to a sign that hung over one of my colleagues' desks at MIT, which read, "We shall overclaim." You know? And the field of artificial intelligence in particular has a long history of overclaiming. And I think you so rightly point out that this is related to the economic drivers of the field. Historically, about 90% of artificial intelligence work has been fueled by DARPA, by the Department of Defense. And when you're going after grant money, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, I've got this idea, and now much of it is being funded by venture capitalists, same thing. So going after soft money, you're not going to say, I've got this idea and it might pan out in about 100 years. You know, you can't either say, well, I've got this idea and, you know, it's got a 70, 80, maybe even 90% chance of not panning out, but there's this little chance that it will. You don't. You're going to overclaim. Okay? And as Adrian pointed out to me before the talk, he said, don't you think that this is a field where peer review is failing? Where people really just don't stand up and say, you know, the emperor hasn't got a whole lot on right now. And I agree with you completely on that. But I think because so much of the field is run on soft money, there's just a tacit agreement that, I won't rain on your grant proposal so long as you don't rain on my grant proposal. And there's an awful lot of overclaiming going on. Jaron Lanier has pointed out some interesting things. Jaron Lanier is sort of guru-in-chief at Microsoft right now. He was in the beginnings of virtual reality, also a songwriter for the Grateful Dead. Very interesting and intelligent person. And he has pointed out that when transhumanists believe that the singularity is near, and they often base this on Moore's law, which says that every 18 months our computing power is going to double. Moore's law only deals with hardware. It doesn't deal with software. So even though our computing speed and our memory capacity has been doubling, he said our software capabilities have not been doubling. I also believe that Moore's law is going to plateau at a certain point, that you can only get so small, and at some point you can't get a lot smaller. So I think that I'm not so worried. I don't think the singularity is imminent. I really don't. Lanier also pointed out that we say, well, gee, when a computer passes the Turing test, it's going to show that they've become so much more intelligent, but that may not be the case. He said, a computer may pass the Turing test not because it's gotten that much more human-like, but because we have gotten that much more machine-like. And I think we saw an instance of this last summer. You might recall there were little snippets in the news about the Turing test has been passed because there was a program that over Twitter, so we're talking about 140 character tweets, the program pretended to be a 14-year-old Ukrainian boy. And for a while it had some people going, thinking, well, this really is a 14-year-old Ukrainian boy. I think what that showed was not that the computer had gotten all that much more intelligent, but that as we depend on communicating with each other through things like Twitter and limit ourselves to 140 character statements, it is us who are becoming more machine-like. And Lanier was absolutely right there. And this takes me back to Brian's paper, because he brought up the question of René Girard. And as Girard so well points out, we are mimetic creatures. And as we spend more time communicating with and through machines, it is precisely that mimetic tendency in us that is going to make us become self-limiting. And that this is a danger that I think we need to watch out for. And I'll just end by saying that I think all of you pointed out that it is not for us to be pessimistic, nor to be Luddites and suggest that we throw away the technology. I think it is, however, for us to maybe sometimes point out, as I said earlier, that the emperor hasn't got a whole lot of clothes on, and to point out that as we make progress with machines, it would behoove us to be a little more thoughtful about exactly how we are going to use them, both as tools and in particular as mediums with which we communicate to each other. Because in the end, the Christian message does say that being in relationship with each other, that it is love. It is through our love for one another, through our relationships with each other, that we become the image of a Trinity that is defined in the Gospel of John as being love itself. So we need to think carefully and not let our technology limit us as we try to be the fullness of the image of God with one another.
Thank you. Well, each panelist, if you wanted, you could make one remark. How about that? Anybody game, or are you happy?
Okay, I'll go first. I like that applying Girard to the machines idea, that maybe we've been imitating our machines a bit too much. I've been thinking about Girard in terms of transhumanists trying to rival God or rival nature, but the idea of humans also trying to rival our own machines, or trying to create, maybe as we try to create God or improve nature, maybe what we're actually doing is just imitating our tools or machines or something like that. It's an interesting thought, so thank you.
Mary, were you going to add something?
Yeah, and I appreciate your thought about who are these people in the transhumanist community. And as I was doing some of the web kind of surfing on, supposedly institutes that are kind of thinking about the future of AI. And I think there was one conference that happened in Puerto Rico in January, and they had like a researcher from a computer scientist from Berkeley, from MIT, from different places, along with somebody from DeepMind and other places like that. And of all of the presenters, only one woman from the Department of Defense. And I was just kind of looking, you know, if those are the groups that are looking at what's happening to AI, you know, what, and there's so little diversity, you know, what kind of concerns would be surface? And so the concerns that I'm thinking about, what is the impact of AI on ecology? Because if humans seem to be the central point here, and when we're trying now to be more connected with, you know, all animal species and with the earth, what does transhumanism, you know, with humanity as the center, how does that flesh out with maybe a wider understanding, you know, of our ecological